Tom Clancy's The Division is a game that, on the surface, normally wouldn't appeal to me. I don't really like Twitch shooter type games, and The Division had Tom Clancy's name on it, so I wasn't paying much attention to the game when it was released back in March 2016. Then the reviews started coming in for The Division after it was released, and those reviews were decidedly mixed. In fact, not only did Angry Joe give it a negative review, but it was number 8 on his 10 worst games of 2016 list. Which is kind of ironic, because it was Angry Joe's mostly negative review that led me to believe I might enjoy playing The Division. First off, I learned it was a cover shooter, which tend to be less twitchy and a little easier on the carpal tunnel. Second, the AI-controlled enemies were damage sponges, just like in all the RPGs I'd been playing since I was a kid. And finally, it was a shooter-looter where you play through the same content over and over again to get better gear from RNG loot drops. The review got me thinking, wow, this sounds like Diablo or Path of Exile, except with guns. I enjoyed playing those games, so I added The Division to my Steam wishlist. Now, it sat on my wishlist for some time as I was busy with other things like Black Desert Online, Overwatch, and the Legion expansion for World of Warcraft. But then I was reminded of The Division when I saw the mighty Jingles playing the Survival DLC in late November of last year, and I picked up the base game a few days later. I so thoroughly enjoyed the gameplay that 2 weeks after Angry Joe added The Division to his worst games list, I purchased the season pass for myself and gifted another season pass to my daughter. But this video isn't going to be all candy hearts and roses for Ubisoft and The Division. This game has its fair share of missed opportunities, annoyances, and things that are simply broken. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the Bitter Clinger, and this is my in-depth review of Tom Clancy's The Division. Tom Clancy's The Division was developed and published by Ubisoft. The developer was actually Massive Entertainment, but that is an Ubisoft studio. Now, the game may have been released to a lukewarm reception by reviewers and critics, but it was very successful in terms of sales. The Division broke a number of company sales records at Ubisoft, becoming their best-selling new game franchise and pulling in over $300 million in the first week. That's a great first week. Unfortunately, the subsequent weeks have not been so kind to the game. The Division would lose 85% of its average player base on Steam over the next 90 days, and eventually hit an all-time low of just under 2,000 concurrent players in September of 2016. Now, part of the player attrition may be explained by people who came into the game with the wrong expectations. Gamers see Tom Clancy's name on the game, and they automatically think something along the lines of a traditional tactical shooter like Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon, which is entirely reasonable. I think the bigger problem was there just wasn't that much to do in the game once you played through the main storyline campaign. They had the Dark Zone if you enjoyed toxic, unbalanced PvP, and that's about it. This IGN article from March 2016 tries to shore up the lack of endgame content by listing all the things you can do after reaching max level. But everything on this list boils down to two basic types of content: daily missions and the Dark Zone, which we already know is either not at all appealing to players or won't hold their interest for very long. So let's talk about what Ubisoft is doing to keep players interested in the game today, and how they're monetizing The Division to keep the game alive. The Division currently retails on Steam for $50, but that's the full retail price, and I don't think anyone actually pays that price. I purchased my copy for $25 in November of last year, so if you decide you're interested in The Division, I would recommend waiting for a sale. There is a free trial available through Steam that will allow you to play the game for free for 6 hours. That's probably long enough to experience the general gameplay, but the current player population won't support any co-op or PvP opportunities until you reach the endgame content. Today, there is quite a bit of variety in the in-game content, at least compared to what was available when The Division was released. In addition to world bosses, daily missions, and the Dark Zone, Ubisoft has added high-value targets and 2 incursions to the base game. High-value targets is NPC bounty hunting that can be done solo or as part of a group, while incursions are PvE group content, kind of like dungeons in an RPG. There are 2 additional incursions available with the purchase of DLC for the Division. There are currently 3 DLC packs that can be bought for $15 each, or cheaper if you get them on sale. The Season Pass is available for $40, also cheaper on sale of course. The Season Pass includes all 3 DLC, a few weapon skins, and a handful of outfits for your character. Now, before you run off and get the Season Pass, here's a quick rundown on the DLC. The Underground is PvE only, at least for now, and it basically offers random co-op missions. It's a good way to get geared up quickly, and the Underground DLC also unlocks the Dragon's Nest Incursion. The Survival DLC pits you against the elements, enemy NPCs, and enemy players if you choose to do it in PvP mode. I'll tell you this right now, if you're only interested in survival PvP mode, the queue times can be really bad, at least on the PC platform for North America, so add that to your considerations for purchasing the Survival DLC. Finally, we have the Last Stand DLC, which is basically your PvP battlegrounds. Last Stand also unlocks the Lost Signal Incursion. That covers the DLC for the Division, but the DLC is not the only source of revenue for the game. There is an in-game cash shop, though you could be forgiven for not being able to find it. If you search long enough, you'll eventually find this guy tucked away back in the corner. He's the Milton of Division vendors. Milton here sells a variety of outfits, equipment skins, and emote animations. They're purely cosmetic and have absolutely no impact of any kind on gameplay. The premium currency is known as premium credits, which will cost you about a penny a piece. So equipment skins will run you up to $5, outfits will cost you between $8 and $11, and emotes will run you anywhere from $3.75 to $8. There's also a currency called Uplay units, which is Ubisoft's way of apologizing for you having to use this complete piece of software called Uplay. You can earn Uplay units for completing story missions or killing enemies with each type of weapon and that sort of thing, kinda like achievements. You then spend your units on skins, outfits, and other in-game items available at the Ubisoft Club store. It's a nice little loyalty program, and I think you can even earn units by playing other Uplay-enabled games like Ghost Recon or one of the Far Cry titles. Now, this is my first Ubisoft game, and I admit that I expected some unsavory shenanigans when it came to the cash shop, so I have to give them kudos on not nickel and diming their players to death or constantly spamming them with cash shop notifications. But I also have to say I don't think there's enough revenue here. Maybe I've been desensitized by too many MMORPGs, but $15 DLC and a few underwhelming cash shop items aren't enough to pay for constant development of new content. Or maybe I'm completely misunderstanding what the Division was supposed to be when it was released. It certainly feels like Ubisoft has had a sequel-based monetization strategy all along. But if that's the case, why bother with the new game modes like Survival and Last Stand? It feels like the Division doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up. Does it simply want to be the Division 1 and we all play for 2 or 3 months and then begin waiting for the Division 2? Or does it want to be a full-featured multiplayer online shooter that we all play the hell out of for 5 or 6 years before demanding a new version of the game with upgraded graphics and features? I was hoping for the latter, but maybe that was never the plan. That being said, I guess it's time to talk about the player population as it stands today. There's no player auction house or guild system in the Division, so population only matters for multiplayer content such as co-op missions and PvP battles. Now, I do want to say that my experience is on the PC platform only. I have read that the populations for the console platforms are decent, with the PS4 population slightly higher than Xbox, but that's based solely on information gleaned from online forums. Queue times for the daily missions and the more popular incursions aren't bad at all, anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. Last Stand PvP Battleground queue times run about 5 minutes on average, which means it's sometimes longer than that. Survival PvP mode seems to be quite popular on console, with PS4 and Xbox players reporting queue times less than 5 minutes for well-populated maps, meaning 10 or more players. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for survival PvP on the PC platform. It just doesn't seem to be very popular. But how much of that is just players getting frustrated with the matchmaker and giving up on survival PvP mode? I've heard a lot of people talk about how much they enjoy survival PvP, and it is the most highly rated DLC for the Division. But finding a match can definitely test even the most patient player. However, it is possible to find a match. I watch a couple of streamers that do some survival PvP runs every week, and they do get matches, although not very well populated. Now, I need to give full disclosure here. The Underground DLC is my favorite content for the Division, but I'll talk about the Underground Matchmaker a little later in this video when I get to the segment on things that are completely broken. Sure, I still try the Underground Matchmaker from time to time. I mean, people win the lottery. People get struck by lightning. It's possible I might find a group using the Underground Matchmaker. It's just not probable. Personally, I've had better luck just standing in a conspicuous location, waving my arms and drawing attention to myself. I can usually get a group invite within 1 or 2 minutes doing that. Again, it's hard to tell whether some of these matchmaking problems are due to low player population, or are they due to problems with the matchmaking algorithm. I suspect it's a problem with the matchmaking mechanics. I know they've completely botched the Underground Matchmaker, and that's probably why a lot of Division players turn to the player community for grouping, things like LFG Discord channels and LFG forums. I've used one of the more popular Discord channels and had pretty good luck getting groups for my favorite group content, which is Underground and Incursions. Now, the reason I cover topics like money and population before talking about the details of the game is because the Division is an online-only game with a significant amount of multiplayer content. Obviously, the value of that content is going to depend on not only the price, but also the player population, as well as Ubisoft's ability to sustain the player base. But now that I have covered those things, we can talk about the actual game. The setting for the Division is a New York City that is ravaged by disease, overrun by armed criminals, and buried under piles of garbage, otherwise known as, just New York City. The backstory begins when someone weaponizes the smallpox virus, infects a large amount of the currency, and releases that currency into circulation on Black Friday. Now, in case you don't live in the US or are otherwise unfamiliar with Black Friday, it's the day after the Thanksgiving holiday when Americans show their gratitude by going to a shopping mall and beating up other Americans and taking their stuff. It's a time-honored tradition here. Alright, back to the origin story. The infected currency, and therefore the virus, spreads like wildfire and quickly overwhelms civil services. Of course, this eventually leads to a complete breakdown in social order. Officials tried to quarantine the infection in a relatively small section of the city, but that failed, and now that part of the city is known as the Dark Zone. I find this to be a brilliant origin story. Sure, it's got some holes here and there, but nothing that couldn't be fleshed out with a little more thought, but the possibilities are endless. I mean, did the infection make it out of New York? There are a number of dollar flu spreading toll booths on the I-95 corridor between New York and Washington, D.C. It's just a fascinating scenario to me, and I assume Ubisoft thinks so as well, because there's a live-action movie in the works for Tom Clancy's The Division. Well, I say in the works. They've got a screenplay fleshed out and have named a couple of actors. I don't know if they've actually started spending money on production yet. Anyway, back to the review. You play as a specialized Division agent called in to suppress the criminal element and establish a base of operations in the city, and your journey begins at the character creator. The character creator isn't anything to write home about, but there are no character-based classes or abilities. You get to select from a handful of predetermined appearance options, and that's about it. All your talents and skills are obtained through your base of operations and your gear selections. You begin your journey in a sort of tutorial phase that leads you to your base of operations, which is not at all operational when you first arrive. As you progress through the storyline, you'll complete missions and encounters that will reward you with points that can be used to upgrade your base. In fact, the first thing you'll do after initially exploring your base is go on a mission to unlock the medical wing, and that will end the tutorial phase and open up the map for you. The playable map is divided into districts, and each district has a level range and some number of side missions, encounters, and regular storyline missions. Each district also contains a safe house. This is where you will begin and end your adventures in each district. The leveling experience is basically a repeating pattern of checking into a safe house, completing all the missions and encounters in that district, then moving on to the safe house in the next district. And it's this leveling experience that led a number of reviewers to criticize this progression scheme as overly repetitive. And I'll admit that's probably a fair criticism because there are a limited number of scenarios for side missions and encounters. Now, there are 3 types of encounters that are directly related to the 3 wings of your base of operations: tech, security, and medical. Each type of encounter has 3 basic scenarios. There's typically only one of each type of encounter in every district, with a few exceptions. But you won't be repeating every encounter scenario in every district, so it's not quite that bad. But you will be running into the same scenarios over and over again as you progress through the districts, and I can understand where some people may find that to be repetitive. Personally, I didn't mind it at all because the writing, the voice acting, the enemy factions, just everything. It's all so well done that it ends up being a rather enjoyable and relatively quick leveling experience. For just one example of what I'm talking about, each safe house has a JTF officer that will give you a number of side missions and provide feedback as you explore the district. And every one of those JTF officers has a different personality and witty one-liners.
We got word you found everything you needed. Isn't that nice? I hope you didn't get any blood on your gear. It's the hardest stain to get out of the laundry.
I found most of them to be very entertaining. In fact, I found the whole leveling experience to be very enjoyable. It's fun. It can all be done solo or with a friend, and it's a rewarding journey. Now, is that journey worth $50? Well, it depends on what $50 means to you, but the answer is probably no for most people. Is it worth $20? Heck yeah! I would say it's worth $20 even if all you did was play through the storyline content and a little endgame content included with the base game. So what about the DLC or Season Pass? Is that worth the price? Well, that's all endgame content, so I guess we should talk about that. Completing the storyline content will get you to level 30 and bring all 3 wings of your base of operations up to 100%. This means all your skills, talents, and skill modifiers are unlocked, but you're still not quite at max level. For some reason, after reaching level 30, you have to go through a gimmicky world tier progression. You start at world tier 1, and as you kill enemies in world tier 1, the gear drops will have a gear score instead of a level rating. When your equipped gear score reaches a certain threshold, it will unlock the next world tier. That progression continues until you reach the highest world tier, which is world tier 5. Now, I have no idea if Ubisoft intended this world tier mechanic to be part of something bigger, but it's ridiculous. It's a meaningless waste of time and energy, at least in my opinion. And that's why I recommend equipping the gear with the highest gear score, whether or not it's an actual upgrade for your current equipment. This will allow you to quickly get to World Tier 5, which is where the endgame starts and the real loot rewards begin to drop. These are the in-game activities included in the base game and therefore don't require any DLC. Replaying storyline missions on harder difficulties. The loot rewards get better as the difficulty increases. Incursions are much more challenging than storyline missions, and you typically need to have at least 1 or 2 team members with the proper build spec to overcome certain phases of the incursion. Only 2 of the 4 incursions are available in the base game. The other 2 require separate DLC to unlock, and that means the most challenging part of those incursions is finding a group. You can hunt world bosses, which are named enemies in known locations throughout the districts and in the Dark Zone. World bosses can drop exotic gear, but it's far from guaranteed. The daily and weekly high-value target vendors will give you multiple missions to go out and kill high-value named bosses. Just to be clear, these are different from the world bosses. If you die while hunting HVTs, then you fail the mission and have to return to base and speak to the HVT vendor again. And finally, we have the Dark Zone. Now, as the game industry produces a wider variety of PvP experiences, I'm finding that open world PvP is becoming one of the least preferable. And that's exactly what the Dark Zone is, an open world PvP environment. Of course, there are also plenty of PvE activities in the Dark Zone, but they come at the risk of being attacked by other players. I admit I don't spend a lot of time in the Dark Zone, but the weekly mission usually requires 20 or 40 elite enemies to be killed in the Dark Zone. So I go to areas known as landmarks within the Dark Zone. You see, all the loot you gather in the Dark Zone is highly contaminated, so it needs to be extracted and decontaminated before you can use it. However, the loot you collect in landmark areas doesn't need to be extracted. It simply goes directly into your inventory, which makes landmarks particularly suitable for PvE farming. Because a lot of things can happen at extraction areas. You can get attacked by rogue agents, or you can become a rogue agent yourself when other players show up to extract. There is a penalty for dying as a rogue agent, but it seems negligible to me, a token penalty at best. So I don't know of any reason to not go rogue if that's the sort of thing that trips your trigger. Finally, I've already talked about the endgame content available in the 3 DLC packs. The PvE Underground, the PvE/PvP Survival, and the PvP Last Stand. So, depending on your interests there, whether they be PvE or PvP, those DLC packs can absolutely give you great value, especially if you can pick them up on sale. Now, all of these activities will drop loot for you, and the loot you're interested in is high-end gear, exotic gear, and gear sets. All the gear has a number of attributes affecting your skills and stats. High-end gear, or better, also comes with at least one talent that will provide some additional enhancement to your build. Set gear provides additional bonuses for each piece of the set you have equipped. For example, I'm experimenting with a Predator Sentry hybrid and trying to decide if I prefer the 10% bonus to headshot damage granted by the 3rd piece of Sentry's Call, or do I want the bleed effect from the 4th piece of Predator's Mark. After that's settled, I need to decide if I have the right stats and attributes, because I can go to the recalibration bench and re-roll most of these stats. Ladies and gentlemen, the build meta and experimentation has never been better for the Division. In fact, I think it's one of the best in any gear-centric game that I've played. I know there was a time in the Division when you basically had to go with one specific gear set, Alpha Bridge to be exact, and everything else was second rate by comparison. That's no longer the case. There is so much build experimentation happening in the community right now, using every gear set, high-end builds, exotic builds, hybrid builds, and just about every kind of build you can imagine. And the introduction of loadouts makes it so much easier to try new things. It's really a great time to be playing the Division if you're one of those gamers who enjoys tinkering with character builds. Now, this first one is probably a missed opportunity. I think Ubisoft never fully worked out the PvP experience for the Division. PvP is currently gated behind a PvE level grind as well as a heavily RNG based gear grind. At the time I was scripting the narration for this video, the developers announced new 6-piece gear sets are to be implemented in patch 1.7. Again, those new gear pieces will require RNG heavy PvE grinding to obtain. Now, PvE players usually don't mind RNG. Whether it's rolling dice or drawing cards or some other type of RNG, it's been part of the game playing experience for as long as we've been playing games. Of course, PvP is a different experience where you want the player's knowledge and skill to count for more than pure luck with RNG loot drops. And that's why I think a lot of the PvP players in the Division seem to be a little jaded. Along with the imbalances and mismatches that go along with any PvP game, they're forced to play through PvE content that many of them don't enjoy. And that's why I'm including PvP in this segment of the video. I guess this is as good a place as any to talk about some of the matchmaking in the Division, because I think it's completely broken. Now, I've had the great misfortune of watching one of my favorite games be completely destroyed by poorly planned changes to the game's matchmaker. and I wonder if that might be part of the problem for some of the content in The Division. Let's take the PvP queue for survival. Folks, this one should be easy because everyone starts with nothing, so you don't have any gear-based considerations or anything else. The matchmaker should wait for 3 to 5 minutes, then dump everyone in the PvP queue into a survival map. Done. It should be simple. Of course, people with a higher survival rank will likely have a significant advantage in terms of map knowledge, but I just don't think that's enough to prevent 2 players from being matched. And that's exactly what I think is happening. I think an already small number of players are being divided into separate queues based on some unknown criteria being used by the matchmaker. I'll show you what I mean using the matchmaker for underground missions. Let's say we have 18 players queuing for missions, 6 for each difficulty setting, normal, hard, and challenging. The matchmaker divides them evenly into each of the 3 difficulty queues, so we should be good to go, right? Wrong, because the matchmaker then adds another criterion for multi-phase operations. That's not a 4th queue. That one additional criterion turns our 3 queues into 6 queues. And then the matchmaker adds another criterion for mission directives. Again, that's not a 7th queue. Our 6 queues now turn into 12 queues by which to segregate our players. This demonstrates why the underground matchmaker would struggle to create a single full group of 4 players from an 18-player queue, to say nothing of a queue that only had 6 or 7 players. The criteria for random matchmaking should segregate players by difficulty, then match by ranking. But rank would not disqualify 2 players from being matched, only the difficulty setting. Now, that last bit strays into the area of a wish list, and this segment is reserved for things that are either annoying, half-assed, or just plain broken. And as it stands right now, the matchmaker for some of the content in The Division is just plain broken. This final complaint might seem trivial compared to PvP and matchmaking, but I think it's important because it's a big part of the endgame content. There are a number of daily and weekly challenges offering additional rewards for completing storyline missions, survival, underground, and dark zone content. This is a great incentive for players to replay endgame content, which, frankly, they have to replay anyway, so it's a win-win. Except that it's not. Here's a daily challenge to complete 2 storyline missions on hard difficulty and 1 on challenging difficulty. Folks, at this point, completing storyline missions on hard difficulty do absolutely nothing for my character. In fact, challenging missions have little to offer as well. I should be doing these missions on legendary difficulty to get the guaranteed exotic gear in the reward cache. The problem is, if I do one of these missions on legendary difficulty, it doesn't count for a mission requirement with lower difficulty. So I must complete these missions on the specified difficulty setting in order to get my daily completion reward. And while that may very well be working as designed, it's still really annoying. If you're looking for the next Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon, then yeah, you know this game is not that. But if you're looking for a great gear-centric looter, whether you're coming from an ARPG or something like Warframe, I think there's a great experience and a lot of fun waiting for you in The Division. Far from being one of the worst games of 2016, I think The Division is one of the most underrated games on the market right now. Now, it did stumble out of the blocks and plenty of mistakes were made along the way, but if you're watching this video during the Steam Summer Sale, you can steal this game for $20 and pick up the season pass for another $15. The game still has dedicated development support by Red Storm Entertainment, which is another Ubisoft studio. In addition to the new gear mechanics being released in patch 1.7, new content is on the way in patch 1.8, so there's still plenty for Division agents to do in The Division. Also, the player community is still very active. I follow the Division forums and Tom Clancy Elites on Twitter for Division-related updates and news. I've joined a couple of Looking for Group Discord servers and had great success finding groups there, at least during the hours that I play. And I follow Insanity on YouTube. He produces timely content for The Division and he streams gameplay a few times a week. Now there are plenty of Division streamers on Twitch and Mixer, but Insanity streams on YouTube Gaming, and I can watch YouTube from any device in my house, so it's more convenient for me. Well, there you have it, folks. Another in-depth review in the bag. I hope I've covered all the important stuff, and I hope I've managed to answer most of your questions about Tom Clancy's The Division. Until next time, this is Bitter Klinger, signing out.